Joining me today is candidate for Ward 2 Councilor-at-Large, David Micley. Thank you so much for joining me today. I appreciate you taking the time and helping us get to know you a little bit better.
Thanks for having me, Jen. It's a pleasure to be here.
So first off, why are you running? This is your first time running as a candidate, correct?
Yeah, first time running in Newton. And, I'm running because first, I think local politics is probably the, most effective form of politics to make change and to shape the community that you live in. And I think there's some things that, Newton can do better to sort of, grow as a community that better serves the current residents and also is more accessible to people that want to move here.
So what are your priorities? I mean, you listed a couple of those here, but according to your website, you have priorities like housing and opening the schools, which everyone, has a say in, but you're running for counselor and not school committee. So that your opinion is known, but so you have housing, the pensions, obviously, and innovation for Newton. Can you explain a little bit more detail what those mean and how do you think you can help in those situations?
Yeah, of course. So on the housing side, I think, I'm running to help sort of move our approach to housing forward and make Newton more accessible to people at different life stages and different needs. Right now there's sort of, you have two ends of the housing spectrum. You have some big apartment buildings and you have a lot of standalone houses, but there's not so much of that stuff in the middle. So I think there's a lot of room to expand the housing stock in the middle in a thoughtful way that makes Newton more accessible for young families like my own that want to move in and for, retirees that want to downsize, and to do that in a way that also maintains the character of the neighborhoods where people still feel like Newton has that suburban charm. So that's sort of, my thinking on the housing side. On the schools, you're completely right. The city council, our authority on that my authority on that being involved in the city council is really just to vote up or down on the budget. But there's, obviously, what the city council says matters, and actions like what the city council did recently to release that memo, encouraging and really demanding for a more comprehensive plan to get the schools fully reopened as soon as possible. I think that kind of stuff is important. That kind of stuff matters. And, I'm really glad to see that the city council did that. And I think that the city council's voice on those things matter. On the pension and retiree healthcare costs and that issues, that to me is sort of one of the big reasons why I threw my name in the hat. I saw that as a tremendous issue that wasn't being talked about enough. I mean, it's just such a big issue. It's almost scary in terms of how underfunded we are relative to what we need and the challenging road to get there. And I think that any conversation about all the things we want to do in terms of growing and developing our city need to be done with our financial constraints in mind. And with, $1 billion that we're going to owe over the next few decades, we need to really think about how we're going to address that funding gap, which, right now, I think that we just need to talk about more aggressively and think through really what are the trade-offs that we're willing to make to ensure that we can meet those liabilities that we're already committed to. And then related to that, ideas like innovation and entrepreneurship, I think the right type of development, the right type of commercial and office and retail development can really help increase the activity in the city, can increase the revenue that we get from commercial tax, from a stronger commercial tax base. And I think we actually don't take enough advantage of that. I mean, Boston is a startup and tech hub. There's all kinds of great companies that are building their offices in Boston that are looking for the suburbs to expand their offices. And I don't think Newton does enough to make this a place that's attractive for those companies. And there's a lot of things we can do on that end. We can, create a task force of, investors and leaders in the space. We can think about creating spaces where startups can work out of, ways that they can partner with the city on helping us solve problems that can also be great sort of beta testing environments for them to roll out new products. I mean, sort of the options are endless on that front, but I think that's a conscious agenda that I want to pursue that will help make Newton more lively and also help us deal with some of the financial challenges that are ahead of us.
What kind of experience or what is your background to help in these areas?
Yeah, sure. So, kind of listed a lot of areas. As far as the housing background goes, I think my perspective as, I'm a father of two, I'm trying to raise a young family here. My background there is really just my perspective from having grown up here, having my parents to live here and trying to raise children here. And to me, any housing solution should take into account the needs of multiple generations, right? There's not just one group of people that we're serving and addressing, but there's all sorts of people. And, for example, my generation, the group of people 25 to 44 years old, that demographic has been decreasing in Newton over the past few decades. And, I think just bringing the perspective of what the needs are for this demographic is something I bring to the table, but not taking those needs in isolation, also looking at, elderly folks, because that's my parents' generation. They might not like that I just describe them as elderly folks, but, they're in the age range where they want to stay in Newton and they want options here. And I grew up around the corner from my grandmother, and she lived in her home until her 80s. And it was great to be in a place where she could walk to things and have a good suburban life, but also be near, her son and her grandchildren. And I think that intergenerational vision of people at all different life stages living here, that's sort of my goal, and that's the perspective I'll bring. As far as the schools go, I think that the school committee is obviously more intimately involved with the school and school decisions. But I think one thing I'd support, and you want to work with the school committee on, is making sure that the financial plan is sustainable. And right now, I don't think it is. And that doesn't mean I have all the ideas for how to solve it. But one thing that I want to bring to the table is, when we see vulnerabilities, when we see challenges in the finances of the city, to talk about them and to wrestle with them and to work on them together, because deferring them for conversations down the road only make them harder to solve. And then the last thing on the city pension and retiree healthcare, it sort of goes into, I have experience in finance and, working with major institutions that are also grappling with those types of challenges, where their funding rate is low, where they have hard decisions that they need to make. And when it's always a better idea to do scenario analysis, to plan in advance, and to think about the range of outcomes such that you're prepared for anything that's going to hit you. And that's sort of the attitude and approach that, I have from working in finance that I bring to the table on that.
What areas actually have worked for the city, or for the city council for that matter, in terms of just, the amount of projects that are here, building up that housing, as you say, the Northland project, the Riverside project, adding housing? Are those areas that have worked in your eyes?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of great things that are happening with housing. I think things that the city has done well is looking to developers as a resource for us to, to get value out of, right? Developers, at the end of the day, they're in it for one reason. They want to earn a profit. But the city can use their interest in a way that furthers our agenda. And I think some of the things that the city council has done with, some of the developments you mentioned, is really negotiating with the developers on making sure that they were committed to funding certain programs and initiatives to mitigate traffic, to pay for other city agenda items. And I think that sort of attitude is appropriate and should continue. And I think we should have developers competing to work with us so that we have as much leverage as possible in negotiating in a way that we only approve projects that advance city interest, and we get and extract as much value out of it as we can. So that's one thing that I think the city has done. And I think, probably something that needs to happen more is the question of multifamily housing, which is such a contentious and touchy subject that, is people are really sensitive to, because, they don't want their neighborhoods being overcrowded. But at the same time, some people really want to make this more accessible to more folks. And, the recent passing of the Massachusetts law that's going to, affect a lot of these communities like Newton is going to impact Newton and sort of force certain decisions that I think in the end will be better for Newton, in terms of having multifamily housing near transit centers in the right neighborhoods in the right way, so that we're not just all of a sudden becoming an urban city, but we still are a suburb. So I think that's one thing that, we're going to see ahead. And the schools, I think the city council has done a good job of being vocal on that issue. And if you want to talk about areas where I think we're not doing a good enough job, and again,
Sure, you can mention a few.
Yeah. Well, it goes back to the city pension and retiree healthcare issue. I mean, that is just such a tremendous issue that I don't think is exciting for anyone to touch. It's not exciting to talk about the things that we've already committed to. It's more exciting to talk about the things we want to do. But I just think that you need to have a balance of fulfilling our obligations, while at the same time thinking about what constraints those obligations have on our aspirations and things that we want to build.
So what makes you stand out? Because you're running against two candidates who have previously run. This is your first time running. So how do you differentiate yourself from them?
Yeah, so I think I can sort of speak to my own experience and perspective and the specific value that I think I'd bring. One I think is I have sort of experience across the nonprofit, for-profit and public sector. I used to live in Brookline and was an elected a member of town meeting there, so that was my experience in sort of local politics. And I worked at a number of nonprofits after college in teaching and philanthropy. And I went to business school and then worked in finance after. So I think sort of that multi-sector approach and that approach of collaborating with partners and parties across those sectors, that's sort of the attitude I would bring to the table. And thinking about, okay, how can we, sort of, as I mentioned before, how can we partner with the innovation startup ecosystem to, create a growing startup scene in Newton that would be, a great source of revenue for our taxes and just great for the vibrancy of the city that would support the small businesses, support the retail, the restaurants, all that activity that we want going on in our village centers. So I think that sort of perspective is one thing I bring to the table. And I think, the specific experience I have in finance, studying finance at MIT, I got my MBA there and working in finance. I think that, when you work in finance, the thing that you always think about is what could go wrong. You manage risk more than anything else. And there's a lot of things that I want to do, but at the same time, I want to think about the things that could go wrong from a financial perspective and just create thoughtful plans around those various scenarios. So that sort of perspective, attitude, and experience in finance is something that I think I bring to the table.
And how can someone find out more information about you? Could they contact you? Do you have a website for someone to take a look at?
Yeah, sure. So I have a website. I am running a campaign that is funded on nothing. So it's a grassroots word of mouth campaign. I'm asking all people interested in supporting my campaign to support the local food pantry instead. And for that reason, my website name doesn't have sort of my own domain name, but I will give it to you anyway, because you have to pay for a domain name.
Right.
The website is dmicley.wixsite.com/for-Newton. So that's a mouthful. And probably the easiest way for people to remember how to reach me is just to write to micleyfornewton@gmail.com. And that's spelled MICLEY for Newton @gmail.com. And just want to put it out there that this is my first time getting involved in Newton politics. I'm excited to learn. I'm excited to engage with people of all different opinions and backgrounds. And, any ideas or suggestions you have, I'm really excited to hear about them. So please reach out.
I have to ask why you're donating to the food pantries and not taking donations for yourself to help you run a stronger, well, I guess more widespread campaign.
Yeah, I was sort of thinking about how I wanted to run this campaign over, the past few months. And at the end of the day, I sort of was a lot of things kind of combined to make that decision. One is just sort of a frustration by how much money is spent on campaigns that, in the end of the day, only one person wins. So think about all the losing campaigns and the hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars that could have gone to, a good cause. And just think about where the need is right now. I mean, there's a need for people to get food on the table. And I thought that'd be, this be a good opportunity to do that. And the final thing is, this is my first campaign in Newton, and I wanted to go into it with the ability to really develop and put forward my own independent thoughts and not have any strings attached to anything. So that's not to say I think there's anything wrong with raising money for a campaign. That's the normal thing to do. That's what makes sense to do. And that's, an effective strategy. But I just wanted to try a different approach and see if it could be effective. And so that's what I'm doing.
Well, thank you so much for your time. And of course, anyone can go out and vote on March 16th or do the mail-in or early voting as well. So thank you very much, David Micley, for joining me today. I appreciate you taking the time, and I look forward to talking with you in the future.
Thanks, Jen. It was great to be here, and thanks for having me on the show.